Your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission.
It's at 9:30 on ABC News 24 and later on ABC.
The half-hectare site will become an urban farm at a cost of more than $1.5 million. It's been a reprieve from the rain, but parts of the Lower Hunter are still submerged.
Reporting from Washington.
Reporting from London.
New Delhi. Beijing.
From Darwin.
For ABC News 24.
24.
Hello and welcome to Afternoons. I'm Tony Eastley.
And I'm Kumi Taguchi. Our top story today, an outpouring of grief and disbelief as Belgium mourns the victims of the Brussels terrorist attack.
Raids and recriminations as a massive manhunt continues for other members of the terror cell.
Condemnation by world leaders and a vow to support Belgium in the fight against IS.
And no changes to Australia's terror alert, but the Prime Minister says there's a weakness in European security.
Our border protection, our domestic security arrangements are much stronger than they are in Europe, where regrettably they allowed things to slip.
Thanks for joining us. Belgium has declared 3 days of mourning after yesterday's terror attacks in Brussels. More than 30 people were killed and dozens more injured when bombs went off at two locations. At about 8 a.m. local time, twin blasts hit the international airport.
About an hour later, another explosion struck a metro station near the headquarters of the European Union. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility. We start our coverage in Brussels with our Europe correspondent, Lisa Miller.
Just hours after the attacks and police swooped on a suburb north of the city centre, finding a bomb filled with nails and a flag from the so-called Islamic State. There were tense security operations that continued into the night. The man on the right is now the focus for police. They believe he survived the attack on the airport, the black gloves on the other two possibly hiding the detonation devices. They struck just after 8 a.m. Fear and confusion marked the moments after blasts ripped through the airport.
Stay down.
While some stayed still, others ran for their lives as ceilings collapsed and glass from the windows crashed to the floor.
I heard a gunshot and what sounded like Arabic. Then I heard boom, an enormous explosion.
And then a second explosion, and I saw a very big ball of fire. So high as the ceiling. Terrible explosion. And then we ran away.
I'm so scared. I feel like it's the end of the world.
An hour after the first explosions, a blast tore through a train carriage in the city centre.
I'm in shock. I was in the first carriage. I saw an explosion, a flash of light, and then the whole metro exploded. The windows came in, the doors opened, and everybody dropped to the ground.
Outside, emergency workers struggled to cope with the injured.
These are war injuries. I've got more than 40 years' experience on the job, so I've seen a lot of things. I think this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my career.
Those caught up in the chaos were taken to a nearby sports centre.
Hundreds of people have been inside for hours with no flights and no public transport, very few hotel rooms. They have nowhere to go. Some of them are relying on the kindness of strangers.
We found a place to spend the night, thanks to the good hospitality of... I don't know his name.
I heard that the hotels in the area were all booked full, so I had for spare places to sleep.
The deadly attacks have left Brussels in lockdown and the country's terror alert raised to its highest level. They come 4 days after the arrest of Salah Abdeslam, the prime suspect in the Paris terror attacks. But officials say it's too early to connect the events, despite a claim of responsibility by a site affiliated with Islamic State.
Ladies and gentlemen, What we feared has happened. Our country and our citizens have been hit by blind, violent and cowardly attacks.
A makeshift memorial is already taking shape, a minute's silence planned as this city struggles to absorb the terror at its heart. Across Europe, monuments were lit in solidarity, bearing the colours of Belgium and the country's pain. Lisa Miller, ABC News, Brussels.
The Prime Minister says the deadly attacks in Brussels demonstrate weaknesses in Europe's security systems. Malcolm Turnbull has been briefed by intelligence agencies on the bombings, which he's labelled barbaric.
He says attacks are a reminder of why Australia needs strong policies on national security.
We need to be constantly vigilant. Vigilance is the key. We are in a stronger position from a security point of view, David, in Australia than the Europeans are. As you know, there are, for all intents and purposes, no internal borders in Europe, and their external borders are very porous. We have strong border protection in Australia. We have a much greater insight into people who are, we would regard as being threats or likely to pose a risk to the safety of Australians. We have a much greater insight into them than the Europeans do. While we obviously cannot guarantee that there will not be terrorist incidents in Australia, and that's why the threat level is probable and has been so for 18 months, nonetheless we have very strong measures in place. What the terrorists want us to be is frightened. They want us to be scared. They want us to change the way we lead our lives. They want us to turn on each other. And we must do none of those things. We will remain strong, confident, optimistic. We'll go about our lives in our usual ways. And we know we should be reassured that the government and the security services, the men and women, the thousands of men and women whose job it is 24 hours a day to keep us safe, are constantly focused on this, constantly learning from experiences elsewhere in the world to ensure that we keep Australians safe. We have disrupted, we've had 6 major disruptions of terrorist activities in Australia in recent times. We have very good intelligence. Clearly, as I said, the threat level is probable. You cannot guarantee that there will be no terrorist incident. But I can assure Australians that our security systems, our border protection, our domestic security arrangements are much stronger than they are in Europe, where regrettably they allowed things to slip, allowed security to slip, and that weakness in European security is not unrelated to the problems they've been having in recent times.
The opposition leader has described the bomb blasts as a shocking crime.
But Bill Shorten says the Prime Minister shouldn't have made his comments about security so soon after the attacks.
I think it's premature of the Prime Minister to be telling the Belgians what they did wrong within 24 hours of what's happened in Belgium. Now, I've got no doubt that the questions you're raising and all of the matters to do with the adequacy of security are legitimate topics to examine. What are the lessons? What's gone wrong? What are the lessons? How do we make sure that doesn't happen again? But I think within the 24 hours after these atrocities, from the distance of Australia and the safety of Australia, I'm not going to start handing out advice to the Belgians. For me, today is about recognising that people have lost their lives, innocent people have lost their lives.
The US presidential race is still going on there in America, but the Brussels attack has dominated the last day or so. Republican frontrunner Donald Trump has used the tragedy to declare that America has a problem with Muslims. The property mogul has again threatened to close the US borders if he becomes president.
The isolationist stance was quickly condemned by Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton, while President Barack Obama used a speech in Cuba to declare the world must unite to defeat terrorism. Nick Harmson reports from Washington.
President Obama came to Havana to declare one conflict settled.
I have come here to bury the last remnant of the Cold War in the Americas.
Instead, the landmark speech on the final day of his Cuban visit was underscored by a new global threat.
We will do whatever is necessary to support our friend and ally Belgium in bringing to justice those who are responsible. And this is yet another reminder that the world must unite.
As the US leader found common ground with his Cuban counterpart over baseball, on American soil, security was stepped up at train stations, airports and other landmarks. At New York's Ground Zero, a symbol of solidarity. The Congress offered silent reflection over the Brussels attacks, but there was no such calm from presidential primary candidates in the throes of a fierce contest.
Morning, everyone. While our friends and allies are attacked by radical Islamic terrorists, President Obama is spending his time going to baseball games with the Castros.
Ted Cruz called for law enforcement agencies to control Muslim neighbourhoods, while the Republican frontrunner Donald Trump declared the US should waterboard terror suspects and consider shutting its borders to some Muslim countries.
Frankly, look, we're having problems with the Muslims, and we're having problems with Muslims coming into the country, and, you know, these attacks aren't coming out of, they're not done by Swedish people.
Donald Trump seized an early lead in the Republican race by promising to seal the Mexican border. He hails his isolationist approach as the reason for his success, but his likely opponent in November's presidential poll says it's doomed to fail.
Whereas some of my opponents want to build walls and shut the world off, well, you tell me, how high does the wall have to be to keep the internet out?
On national security, the differences couldn't be more stark. Nick Harmson, ABC News, Washington.
Well, time now for your weather with Graham Creed. And Graham, it's a fairly quiet weather day for you.
Yes, not much in the way of heavy rainfall. At this stage, very isolated thunderstorm activity, and it looks as though that'll continue for much of tomorrow as well. Although we do start to see things become a little bit interesting through parts of Western Australia by around about Good Friday, and there should be some good news in that for Perth. Now, we've got a little bit of light rain falling through the southern parts of Western Australia. Most of the falls there well below 10 millimetres at this stage. One isolated fall to around about 8 millimetres. A little bit of light patchy rain falling through South Australia as well and into the far west of Victoria, but again, really nothing in the way of significant falls with that. I think for South Australia, 3 millimetres has been the highest of the falls around Kangaroo Island. Also been a few showers and storms about the northwest of the territory. Falls there have been quite light, and this band of cloud that's triggering some showers and patchy rainfall through the southeast is weakening as it moves further east, so we're really not expecting to see anything in the way of significant falls. Now, even tomorrow, this trough will trigger some showers and storms about the central and northern inland of Western Australia. It'll start to move a little bit further west as we move into Good Friday, which is why we should then start to see a little bit of unsettled activity moving in towards the Perth region. These troughs really aren't going to trigger much through the inland. They will see a little bit of cloud, but we're certainly not looking at the potential of significant falls, just very light and patchy rainfall through parts of the southeastern centres. So looking at the forecast for Thursday, mostly dry conditions through the southeast. There will be a little bit of patchy light shower activity in Victoria, more likely about the north and Gippsland. We're also looking at mild to warm conditions for Adelaide.
Other news now, and a man who murdered a fellow psychiatric patient at a hospital in Adelaide's south has been jailed for at least 20 years.
Reporter Lucas Fontaine reports from South Australia's Supreme Court.
Lyndon Luke Sechrist was detained at the Noarlunga Hospital in August 2014 when he killed a fellow detainee. The 25-year-old was suffering from a drug-induced psychosis when he was found standing over the body of 43-year-old Stephen Barton. Justice Trish Kelly today jailed Sechrist for life, describing the case as tragic. She said in destroying Mr Barton's life, Sechrist had also destroyed his own and left two families grieving. Justice Kelly said it was a sad example of the catastrophic results of people using the drug ice. The court heard Sechrist had lied to the jury during his trial, and Mr Barton's family still didn't know why he'd been killed.
There's no reasoning to it. There's no answer to why. We've got to live with that. We've got to cope with that.
Sechrist has launched an appeal against his conviction.
A hearing has started in Sydney for Auburn's suspended Deputy Mayor Salim Mahaja over allegations he threatened a man in a gym last September.
Personal trainer Bruce Harat, the father of a Sydney siege survivor, told the court that Mr Mahaja approached him aggressively and threatened to kidnap his children. Mazoe Ford has more.
Salim Mahaja is in court on a stalking and intimidation charge relating to an incident that happened at the Burwood Anytime Fitness in September last year. It was an incident with personal trainer Bruce Herritt, who also happens to be the father of Sydney siege survivor Joel Herritt. This morning, Mr Herritt has been in the witness box, and he told the court that on September the 16th last year, around 9:30 in the evening, he was training a client near the weights area when he observed a man slamming the weights down. He says he asked him to stop doing that, and the man swore at him, said, "Don't you know who I am? And what gives you the right to tell me what to do?" That man was Salim Mahaja. Mr Mahaja doesn't dispute that a conversation happened, but said it wasn't aggressive or those words at all. Mr Mahaja then went out to the car park where Mr Herritt was getting in his car to leave for the evening, and another conversation took place. Again, both men say there was a conversation, but their accounts of the content are very different. Mr Herritt said that Mr Mahaja threatened his family, said that he would find where he lived and kidnap his children, and he was afraid for that because of the background, because of his son being involved in the Lindt Cafe siege. Mr Mahaja disputes all of this and says that he never threatened Mr Herritt at all. This is a hearing that's going to go for 2 days. There are 9 prosecution witnesses and 2 witnesses for the defence.
Mazoe Ford there. As the damaged icebreaker Aurora Australis waits to be repaired in WA, the Australian Antarctic Division says its most recent mission was not in vain.
Before the ship broke its moorings in a blizzard, scientists made an unprecedented discovery. From Hobart, here's Ted O'Connor.
In late February, the Aurora Australis was at Mawson Station when in a blizzard it broke its moorings and was damaged. It's since sailed to Fremantle in Western Australia, where its owner P&O Maritime has undertaken a thorough assessment of the damage and is now finding a dry dock for it to be repaired. Now, the Aurora Australis was meant to go to Macquarie Island for a resupply mission. That's been taken over by the French vessel Astrolabe. It will leave on Friday for the round trip. It will drop off scientific equipment and facilitate a changeover of expeditioners. For researchers who've been on the Aurora Australis, they've described it as an extraordinary couple of months because before the incident at Mawson Station, they observed a super swarm of krill that was being fed on by 10 humpback whales.